project in Preston, which is a kind of public art project where we run events that are to do with urbanism and architecture and issues surrounding public space and things happening in Anfield in terms of the art project. I don't actually know a lot about it. Ben, you've been to see it. But I guess we had questions about just about the complexities of it and who. So you've got an artist working there, but almost, I guess, why are they there? And I suppose it's a particular type of artist as well. It's an artist who's got an international reputation within particular circles, but she has that kind of cultural value, you know. And she's been commissioned by an arts institution.
To work. I mean, I suppose it raises then the questions of, to create a piece of work, do you have to be of that place? As a general rule, whether it's a regeneration area or you're doing a piece of work in a shopping centre or you're working in a factory, or do you have to be of that place?
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily, I think that's part of it, but I think what we were thinking more was about the validity. So it's not necessarily about being of that place, but it's about who gives you, almost like who gives you the permission to do that. Or so because what you're doing in situ is in some ways, I mean, again, we're going to have a conversation, but similar in terms of that you're having a long-term.
It wasn't the community saying we want to do something with our flattened spaces. No, it was HMR. It was people in suits deciding that we're going to flatten spaces.
One could argue that was the case with Anfield. That again, it's a construct.
Yeah.
But what got me about this article was that, well, partly that it was very, as you said, lazy journalism. It's like, one of the questions I have is, this is going on, and the fact that he's mentioned Fritz in here, which has got nothing to do with the rest of the article, apart from it's biennial, but he could have picked any biennial artist.
Yeah, it's just that, in that sense. That's
but it is to do with...
Well, that when that's not necessarily in, but they're talking about things like participation and sociability and hospitality, and about art as something that's about developing relationships between people or empowering people, but then actually...
Always in a positive way rather than this positive thing, rather actually... And not subversive? Or, and we were talking about repressive tolerance. So this idea of authority, allowing, patting the artist on the head, if you like, saying you can be subversive if you want. Obviously, as soon as it gets too subversive, we'll...
So it's like what Jenny said, that idea of you can invite an artist to an area. I'm not saying this is what the biennial does, but I think in terms of the art world and how this type of art practice is thought about, it is about an artist going to this supposed community, which is quite a problematic concept anyway, that's in need of some kind of remediation, some kind of support. And
within a mainstream context, it's quite interesting because I kind of linked it to Burnley as well. We put a gig on in Burnley, and even though everything was provided for the kids to get involved and to come in for like virtually nothing, £1 I think, a lot of them still chose to sit outside because they wanted still to be different from what was provided for them, from I guess what they're supposed to be, the man, if you like. So it's very kind of slippery, this notion of community, because you're trying to support people within it, but they're saying, well, we want to be helped, but at the same time we want to be on the outside as well. So it was kind of drifting out of focus with it, really.
The aesthetics of it. And I know, but do you think it's to do with representation then? Because it's almost about, so you're saying as an artist, or artists generally are quite interested in these places from an aesthetic point of view, and I think there is a lot to do with that, but I think the problem is when, as an artist, you are somehow positioned to represent other people. So, and that's the way it is. If you look at the way that art projects are framed, and the way they have to be framed, for not particularly because the institutions want to frame them that way, but because they have to then attract the funding or to perpetuate their own funding, then it can't just be framed as, oh, Titley and Perry are kind of...
Maybe there's this weird symbiotic relationship that's kind of emerged. Like the artist does what the artist does, the arts organisation needs the artist to do something, and strangely, you know, they fit together. But
do you think that
you have to just take on board those contexts. That's just the context of those places. Whether it's actually most people, you know, I do a lot of work in Anfield, and I know Anfield very, very well. 80% of the population really couldn't give a shit. It's the 20% who are have got opposing, very strong views. That's the vocal minority. Actually, everybody else is just, will somebody just do something? Really?
Thinking about what I can do can maybe, I won't say support community, that's wrong, but do something that can support or help or assist or work with what's already happening in the area. So not adding or so that's where I'm good.
Positioning yourself as somebody who's going to ostensibly like solve all these problems in a place, because you're not going to. And by doing that, you are just, it's like you say, you're just kind of making a career for yourself, professionalising yourself. And there's a lot of, I mean, have you read that book, Conversation Pieces? And he talks about this idea of political embezzlement, where you get a lot of artists who were quite well known. So he talks about Alfredo Yar in particular, and says how some artists, they kind of work with particular groups of people, particular communities, and they make work as if they're speaking on behalf of that community, and as if they're empowering that community, but actually they're not. They're sort of speaking on their own behalf, but by saying, look, I'm speaking on behalf of this community in Brighton.
It isn't really mentioned unless you're doing a PhD, and it has to be mentioned because to cover the university's back and everything. But within the arts world, it almost seems like the artist can, you know, carte blanche, can do whatever they like. Doesn't matter if they insult, doesn't matter if they, you know, do this, that, and the other. I'm not saying that, you know, artist work can't be edgy and ethical. Of course it can, because you've only got to look at, you know, the work that platform doing. Very edgy.
For 15, 20 years, that when you start putting things in place that you think are going to be helpful, it can actually stifle.
But ethics shouldn't be stifling.
Well, ethics shouldn't do, but you'd like to think, I guess, that there's artists, if you're going into work in somewhere, that you're going to have that anyway. And
yeah, but the thing is, I don't think that it's not always the case.
Well, yeah, but I suppose then you learn from that. If you can't do that, and if you can't work under those kind of set of guidelines, then it's going to be difficult to get work in the future, isn't it?
Artists who can charge a lot of money for doing a commission because they have a particular cultural value that I don't have. But
that's always the thing that intrigues me, because the biennial pays so badly that
I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about.
It's never a great check that goes to.
No, I don't mean. I'm not talking about the biennial. I'm talking about kind of generally.
Quite
so
often it's never big checks, is it?
No, it's not big checks. But what I'm saying is, there's still, even with this kind of practice, and there's a lot of talk about, you know, the kind of longer term practice and the kind of thing that you're trying to do. Even though there seems support for it, it's still difficult to make a case for if you don't have that sort of moment of display or that object or something that can easily fit into that art world where it is about commodities and it's about different types of practice-based research. So what does that mean? So there's an academic side of it, and the fact that even though you might do an academic qualification like a PhD in art practice, you're still supposed to fit into this very kind of social sciencey framework. So we were kind of interested in thinking about art practice as research, and what does art tell us about the world, and those kind of things. But we're still, I mean, there's me, Ben, Sophie and Helen.
Where I came from, and realising some of the opportunities that we have there to make a difference. Like, you know, having a conversation with the community centre and the people at the community centre who've said, we really want to do this, but we don't know how to do it. And I was able to say, actually, that's something I can help with. You know, they have this kind of